G'day, I'm Alister Christie and I run the LearnDelphi.tv website where I have a large number of video tutorials on Delphi, some free, some commercial, and I've been running it for a number of years. Unfortunately, I need to make a confession. I may have mentioned something about pterodactyls in the abstract for this talk, but they don't actually feature, not one. Only the very tenuous link that lots of nested TryFinally statements looks messy, and playing on the word nest, bird nest, pterodactyl nest. Well, enough said, on with my presentation.
I have here sort of a demo application, which is going to be the sort of structure of my talk. And what we're going to be looking at is eliminating these TryFinally nesting arrangements, which are quite typical in Delphi code. Now, I'm using this little test object, and if I control-click on that, we'll see that it has a private info, which basically gets set in the constructor, and in the destructor it just calls show message. So if we run our application and go TryFinally, 3, 2, 1, all of our test objects get freed. So our first mechanism for removing these TryFinally statements is basically we're going to have a list of the objects and free them all at once when we're done. So I'll create a new unit and I'll call it doFinally, and we'll create a new class. doFinally, and it's a class, and we'll have a private section and a public section. Now we're storing a list of objects, and there is quite a nice useful class for that called tObjectList, and it's in CONTNS, system containers, I think. Yep. So let's call it a free list. Now, of course, we'll need to create that and destroy it. Destroy and override. Now, the nice thing about the object list is by default, when it's freed, it will automatically free all the objects that it contains, and there's a parameter which is owns object, which I'm pretty sure defaults to true. But we'll explicitly set it just to indicate that's what we intended. And we probably want one method on that. And add our object. So we can now rewrite our TryFinally. So first of all, we'll want to use the unit, of which we have one, and we will create our first doFinally, first iteration of it. So what we want to do now is create and we can get rid of all the rest of this. And of course we want to a bit of a copy and paste. And finally, so we've reduced the amount of code quite a lot. Our classes will still get freed even if there's an exception raised. We can run that. And 3, 2, 1. And it works just as before. Now, we can actually get rid of this free here completely. If we make t-do-finally instead of a object, we can make it an interface. So, well, I suppose that instance of it there. So let's take all this code and paste it into our using interface, and we'll eliminate a little bit more. So we go back to our do finally and create an I. Actually, I'm going to be pedantic. I prefer the lowercase version. And we can put a GUID in there just for completeness. And we want this procedure as being our public interface. Oh, slightly too much there. And we can say that instead of just being inheriting from t-object, inherit from t-interfaced object, and I do finally. Okay, verify that compiles. Cool. And we can go back to our version of using interface, and rather than saying t do finally, say I do finally, and get rid of that and those. So our code is looking a little bit shorter. So compare that with our original. This is somewhat easier to follow, and we should verify that it does in fact work. And if you're not using interfaces as yet, it's well worth learning about them. Basically, interfaces get freed whenever they go out of scope, or their reference count reaches 0, more technically speaking. So when the procedure ends, the interface, the contents of the interface is freed, which is our t-do finally, and all our objects get freed at the same time. So let's continue to reduce the amount of code that's required. And I take that lot and chuck it there. And our next step is I'm going to make this return the object that we created. So let's replace that one. So deleted the wrong one. There we go. And we're just returning the object that was created, and that allows us to cut down on some of our code. So rather than going, we can say T1 is assigned, and then throw throw the correct code. Into there. So I'll just be lazy. 2, 3. So now we're creating the objects. They get returned by the add method and assigned to our local variable. And of course, as always, we have lots of code in here that will be doing, all our interactions between our objects and things like that. And I don't need that one anymore. This won't compile for the simple reason that test object and object are not the same. So and that of course is not needed. So we're slowly whittling down the amount of code required to manage our object lifecycle, and we'll just run that and confirm that it still works. So 3, 2, 1 all get created and freed as we, how we expect them to. So our next step is to eliminate one additional line of code, and to do that we'll start with the previous example, and we're going to eliminate this t-do-finally create. Now what I'm going to do is be a little bit lazy. I could throw this in its own unit, but in fact let's do that. I'm just going to have a function called guard, which takes an object and an I oops, getting ahead of myself, and returns a t object. Now I've made an interesting mistake here, but we'll get to that shortly. So what we want to do is, if assigned df, then actually if not, we wish to create our t-do-finally object, and then add our object, and we come back to our guard function, and we're going to eliminate that and throw the guard function, and we also need to pass in our do-finally object or interface. And we run this and click our guard function, and you'll notice it goes 1, 2, 3 as opposed to 3, 2, 1. Now the reason for that is we need to make this a var parameter, which because effectively we are assigning something to it, and the reference count reaches 0 when we exit, and it automatically frees for each one straight away, which is not what we're wanting. So our guard function now 3, 2, 1. And we're now down to not very many lines of code. We are, however, still doing this as operation, which we can actually get rid of. Our last step with respect to classes is I want to eliminate this as t test object from the end. Now we can do that by using generics, have make guard a generic function, but generic functions can't have a global generic function. It has to be a method on a class. So I'm just going to add a method to our class, and rather than doing objects, t objects, I'm just going to do t's. And we also, so there's our generic function of type t. It takes an O of type t and returns a t, but I'm just going to also make that a class because we want them to be able only be objects, or descend from t object. And so Control-Shift-C on that, and our code is going to look remarkably similar to our original guard, with one exception. We need to go as t because we're returning a t, not a t object. And if we come back to here and copy and paste that to our last button. And I need to do one more thing. Well, I don't need to do it, but I make that a class function. Oops. And let's just copy that. And we no longer need that bit on the end. And that's our simplification pretty much done. So run that and confirm that it does indeed work. So you might be asking the question at this point, does this actually work? And indeed it does. If I raise an exception here, and that exception is perfectly fine, T1 and 2 will get created. We raise our exception. T3 is not, this line of code is never going to get reached. And if everything's working correctly, 2 will get freed, and then 1 will get freed. So there's our error message. 2's getting freed, 1's getting freed, and then the user gets to see the error message. So indeed, it is behaving as we would like. So it's not always the case that you're wanting to free things from memory. In this case, now TryFinally, we're wanting to close a file, so doing an assigned file. And in fact, should we run that to demonstrate how that works? Not very exciting. It's just showing an XML file I used in an example in one of my other videos. So can we get rid of this TryFinally? I'm showing you this obviously because we can. And if we go over to our doFinally, what we can do is add another method, add, which doesn't return anything, and it takes a parameter, but we'll get to that shortly. And need to say overload. And ideal candidate is of course anonymous methods. So I'm just going to pass in a tproc, and tproc is defined in utils, and tproc is just a definition for an anonymous method. So there's a bunch of default ones preset up using generics for additional parameters should you need them. So we need to somehow call this anonymous method when, in correspondence with our freeing of objects. Now, the way I came up with to do this is to have a new type, and we call it TDoFinally run or something similar. And we'll have a private member, which is a proc of type tproc. So we'll have a constructor that takes a tproc as a parameter and a destructor destroy, and it's called override. There we go. Oops. Self.proc, and in our destructor we just call it. So in our doFinally add, we just call add and pass in an object. So we have our TDoFinally run dot create and pass in our anonymous method. So fairly straightforward. Now, before I forget, we need to update our interface. Add overload onto the end of that. So I'll just verify that all compiles, and it does indeed. And if you pardon the Yoda reference, we can do our assign file, and we'll use our old mechanism. And we want to pass in an anonymous method, and I'll do this on multiple lines. And of course we can get rid of our TryFinally and close file. And of course, if you really want to, you can be a little bit masochistic and throw all of this on one line. And close. Okay. So if we run that, and well, we probably need to indicate this is actually being called. And we'll make our one-liner even more more convoluted. And we should get a closed. And you can mix and match, of course, and probably extend the guard function class function here to be able to pass in a procedure, but you can. I will leave that as an exercise to the viewer. So that's handling things other than pretty much anything else other than your freeing objects, and you can free objects that way as well, but it'll be a bit of an odd way of doing it. Now, I should also point out that there are other mechanisms for reducing our TryFinally statements. One common one is we have one TryFinally for multiple things that we've created. So we create our T1, 2, and 3. And I have one finally, and if I tidy that up a little bit and we just get all the indentation nice and neat, but what we do need to do is assign T1 nil, T2 nil, and T3 nil, and this now works pretty well. There is, you could argue that there might be an issue if an exception occurs in one of these destructors, but if you've got errors occurring in destructors, then you've got generally bigger problems. So we can verify that this does indeed work, and you might think that, for instance, let's throw an exception in here. You might think at this point, well, T3 is being freed, and that might cause us a problem because it's going to be nil. But of course, we see that if it is nil, nothing's going to happen because the free checks it. So, and we can verify that if we run this, we get our error message, but 2 gets freed, 1 gets freed, and the user sees the error message, and 3, nothing happens. I'll just mention one more mechanism for eliminating your TryFinally statements, and that is using SmartPointers. If we go to this website, it's a post on the ADUG site, and it's on SmartPointers, and there's an implementation on using SmartPointers and their usages. Now I'll flip over to this version of Delphi. We see I've got the that same implementation here, and here is a usage of it. And if we had a default constructor, this would be a little bit shorter, but that works fine, and we can run it, and indeed things get freed, and we can throw our exception in as well. And I'll run it without debugging this time. So we get 2, 1, both freed. Our error message 3 never got created. Just very briefly, let's talk about a mobile application. So I have created an Android mobile app, and as you may be aware, that objects are reference counted, and so they get freed automatically, very similarly to interfaces. So under mobile, we can actually just set a bunch of code and get rid of all of that, and reformat that, and run it. So we can now swap over to the webcam, and here we have our application. Click on the button, and 1, 2, and 3. So they're freed in the reverse order to what they were previously, but they are being freed without any effort on our part. Thanks for watching my talk. I'm Alister Christie from LearnDelphi.tv.
For adding objects to the df var, I would probably look for a way to automatically add the object I want added on the create function or method.
It might be possible. I'd have to have a bit more of a play around and think about that.
I see you just showed a more elegant way of using df add. Okay, so that was the same from Alister Briggs saying that's the follow-up question. So, and passing df to the create function method is probably more elegant, the way I would have likely done it. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, here's one that's a little bit longer. Oh, wait, this is Arc for Windows Mac OS on the roadmap? That's a question from earlier, I guess, but I know.
Well, JT in the opening keynote talked about a stated goal that we would love to have language parity across the different compilers, across the different platforms. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing, it gets trickier on the desktop, and not that I have any additional information, but it's trickier on the desktop if you consider VCL versus FireMonkey, because FireMonkey is written to work with Arc, but VCL is not.
And so C++ wanting to use FireMonkey written in Delphi, which has Arc in the mobile, you can make your own implication about what that might mean for Arc and C++ in the future.
Okay, I plan to write code for a handheld device that will be produced in small numbers. Okay, this question was asked earlier. We'll see who can answer it. It will have a CCD camera, not yet chosen, and a few voltage sources to be monitored via an ADC chip. I was thinking of using Windows Embedded Compact for the whole thing, but it looks like Delphi might be able to do that. What I'm interested in is what are the interfaces that Delphi uses to read image and scalar integer data from cell phones. If you want to, I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. You're going to be able to read, you can call external libraries, and so if you can either get to it through the OS platform on Android or iOS, or there's an SDK that gives you access to it, you can access it from Delphi. We don't have a component you can drop on your form that says read CCD and voltages. There's the OpenCV library that's both Android and iOS that would support dealing with images. You could look into that. Yeah, I don't have an answer for you, John, but I think it's definitely something you could do. There's a lot of options out there to do that.
And there's people who've asked us about other kinds of Android devices. And again, what we need is an Android device and or gadget that has an NDK, that has an ARM7 processor with Neon instruction support. So, and it doesn't have to have a display because you can build a service or console app. You don't have to have a screen service. You can query what services FireMonkey finds, what sensors it finds. But again, for example, my AR drone from Parrot is Android, but there's no, without hacking it, there's no programmable changes you can make to the Android part. I can just send strings to it to command it. So right now, that's why we're saying an Android device with those specifications or iOS device until the day that Apple starts licensing iOS for embedded devices.
Okay, so here's a question. Weren't all variable objects assigned from the stack automatically initialized to nil?
I'm not sure of the exact criteria. Local variables are not assigned to nil, but properties on classes are, because the whole object gets assigned zeros. And interfaces or strings or other managed types do get initialized to nil, or a blank string. I don't know if that helps.
I think that's my understanding, and David nodded his head. So let's see. Is there a good? No, he left. Good place to learn about interfaces. That's a good question.
I mentioned that earlier. There's of course the Delphi help, but if people wanting to get brush up on interfaces and generics and anonymous methods and things like that, Chris Ralston has a good book, something about Delphi XE2.
Oh yes, Delphi XE2
Foundations.
Foundations of Delphi XE2.
And again, interfaces
that's an excellent book.
haven't changed since they were added. I mean,
Yep. I think I have a book at home on interfaces in Delphi specifically. I don't remember what it's called or when it was from, but yeah, it hasn't changed in a while. Interfaces are cool, and now with Arc, everything gets reference counted on the mobile devices. Let's see, I couldn't see how the df local variable was properly initialized prior to doing an if assigned df. Seems to me you are relying upon local variables to be initialized, but in your previous talk you called that a Delphi enter pattern. Please clarify.
So df is a interface, so interfaces get initialized to nil by the compiler, so it does work.
More advanced? That was excellent. Thank you, Paul. Alister, what is your website? I'd love to read everything you wrote and watch everything you've made, including buying any books you wrote.
Yes, learndelphi.tv is the domain name.
Yes, Alister, you have lots of great material out there.
He's got video courses. He's got some free video, but he's got video courses available for purchase, commercial video.
Yeah, there's about 20-something hours of commercial video, and the free stuff I don't know. There's even more of that, which I've been doing, making videos since about 2006 or so.
Sorry, Chris's video, or Chris's book, is Chris Rawlinson? Is that? I can't remember. CH.
Chris Rolliston, I think.
Rawlinson?
Rolliston, I think.
Yeah, Delphi XE2 Foundations. Go to delphifoundations.com, and it's Chris Rolliston, Rolliston.
Is it possible to create an Android service using XE5? So that's something I'm looking into. I think it is, but I haven't verified it. There's a little bit of hacking or jiggering, or whatever you want to call it. It may be necessary for that. Stay tuned to delphi.org, and hopefully I will find a way and blog about it in the near future.
I know that is possible, whether you can do it from Delphi. I'm sure there's a lot of hackery involved. I've used a nice little app called SMS Gateway, which opens up a web interface on the phone, so you can send text messages by calling, just display talking to a phone via a URL.
Yeah, Android's a very robust platform. There's lots of stuff you can do. Some of it can get you in trouble, but there's lots of stuff you can do. It says, is that demo available? I guess that demo you did?
I suppose I could make it available. It'll be on learndelphi.tv. If I do make it available. Certainly the videos will be going up, and I'll throw them on YouTube. And they'll be 15 frames per second rather than 5, so they'll be easier to watch. The component, it's an app called SMS Gateway for Android.
Oh, but it wasn't necessarily.
And it runs a web server.
Not necessarily that one. Okay.
It says there is an intermediate stage prior to making DF an interface where you were relying upon a local variable that wasn't initialized. Was this actually a problem?
Prior to using an interface, so it was assigning constructor to it. So creating an instance of DF or what was it? I call it de-finally.
Alister Briggs says, I still watched even though your session is less than advanced. You can never know too much, LOL. So I guess
it's funny because some people probably would have considered that video to be advanced because I'm talking about generics and interfaces and anonymous methods, whereas other people would think of it as being easy. So it's kind of hard to to label it advanced or beginner. Or
that's always tricky. I have trouble with that same issue. Because here's someone else saying, I'm way out of my league with this presentation. This guy needs to write a book. Buy it from me. Let's see. Alister just said, thank you to Alister Briggs. We have Alister Briggs and Alister Christie. Said, thank you to Alister and thanks to everyone at Code Rage 8. I have to leave now. Bye.
Okay. Well, thank you very much as well for putting this event on. It's always good to have Delphi events. And always good to see you guys come out to New Zealand.
All right. Thanks, Alister. Cool. Thanks, everybody else, for all the questions.
See you later.
See you. Bye.